Hello, and thank you for joining us in today's special edition of All Politics is Local. I am privileged to be able to host a conversation between state and local elected officials, and I will let them introduce themselves. They're very aware of their responsibility as your surrogate in Town Hall and in Hartford. And so without further ado.
Hi everyone, State Representative Devin Carney. I represent Lyme, Old Saybrook, and Westbrook up at the Capitol in Hartford. I just started in January my third term representing the folks down in the 23rd District.
Hello, and my name is Laura Francis. I am the first selectman of the great town of Durham. I am nearly completing my third four-year term in that position.
And I'm Noel Bishop, First Selectman of Westbrook, and I'm in my sixth term, and we're very happy to be here. Thank you for having us.
Hi, I'm Kathy Eno. I'm the First Selectwoman of the beautiful town of Killingworth, and I'm in my fifth term.
So we have seasoned veterans here of managing through several state administrations and federal administrations. And today's conversation is going to be about that interplay between what comes down from on high in Washington and in Hartford, what's sometimes called by the Council of Small Towns or CCM, the municipal version, unfunded and funded mandates. And I hope to do very little talking. I hope to hear from these folks, and that you'll hear from these folks, the challenges that they face in trying to manage, just as we all do in our homes, and this is tax season right now when we're taping anyway, we all know all too well and maybe painfully what it is to have to give up some things to be able to get other things done. They're doing that on our behalf at a local and state level. And I'm really grateful that we have Killingworth, Durham, Westbrook, where we shoot, and Westbrook's representative all here today to start this conversation. We hope that it'll go on through this and further legislative sessions, because this is really where the rubber hits the road. As Tip O'Neill famously said when he was collaborating with Ronald Reagan, all politics really is local, and it's not about the letter after your name or where your office is. It's about the people that we all represent, me as a host of a show and you all as their direct representatives. So with that, I will offer up an open table to the select folks. I guess I'll mention that we're going to go by first names here. We all know each other out in the streets as first names. So Noel, in the first part of our conversation, said when I offered this up, he was eager to start this conversation. They're still in committee, and that's part of why we only are blessed with one of the Hartford representatives here. But things are still in play. A new governor has announced a new debt diet. We're looking at bonding being approached in a much different way. 4 months with bond commission meetings canceled and only one special with very limited agenda. I know there's a lot to talk about. I know we're going to keep it civil and we're going to get it done in the hour, but it's going to go on out in the street. It's going to go on with people watching. And so talk to us about what the challenges that you're looking at right now.
I think all of us in our local communities face the same challenges. As you know, this is tax season, and this is a very good time to have this discussion, because all of us in our municipalities have to bring our communities together. They have to review budgets, and we have to pass taxes. And why do we talk a lot about taxes? We know the fiscal crisis the state of Connecticut's in. We also know there's a concern, and I say to the governor, who was just here last week, 1,000 feet from here, he met with several of our leaders, and his point was, when I became governor, I wanted to reinvent Connecticut. I want people to think, act in big ways, and act boldly. But we've been doing this for a long, long time in our communities. We have to reinvent ourselves every single week, every single taxpayer. What it comes down to is, how can we continue to deliver the quality of services that we have and keep our taxes down? We understand that, we get that. Our concern is, as a state, goes through all the problems it had, they don't shift all those burdens back to us because we can't bear them. But Laura, you made a good comment in our Council of Governments about 2 weeks ago, and you said one of the things we hope the state understands, and I want you to comment on this, all of our towns are not alike. They're different. I'd like you to comment further on that, Laura. That was your contribution.
Right. You know, when they're making laws up in Hartford, Devin, I think they misunderstand the impact on different communities. One-size-fits-all solutions cannot work in Connecticut because we have very rural communities, we have urban communities, we have suburban communities, and our cities aren't even alike. You know, you have Middletown is certainly not like Bridgeport or Hartford or Waterbury or New Haven. And there are other little towns like Bristol and Waterbury that are all different. So I think when we're talking about changing the way services are delivered, we have to remember that lower resource towns can't implement that in the same way that higher resource towns can.
And Kathy, weigh in, because Killingworth has a lot in common with Durham. I think of them as being very similar. I am almost certain that the two of you think of the two communities very differently.
Well, actually, I think we know that we have a lot of similarities, and I've learned a lot from Laura over the years about, she preceded me by a little bit, but I couldn't agree more. There's always a push for regionalization, for example, and we all work regionally so much already that when the state starts saying, well, you can find more efficiencies through regionalization, we kind of scratch our heads sometimes because we regionalize whenever it will actually save us money, but sometimes it won't, and we have to pay attention to those differences.
To pick up on what Kathy said, a very good example, and I like the conversation a little bit about regionalization, because we understand that's important. But when we can do it on our own and we can come together, that's what's important. And I'll use as an example, it's called Nine-Town Transit, the buses that go around. Nobody told us at the state to provide better service to our residents that we had to do this. We've done this, we've contributed to it. That's an example. If you let our municipalities come up with their ideas and implement them, we're more than happy to pay for them. So the concept of regionalization is important, but we've been doing this for a long period of time.
And I'll throw in a full disclosure here. As a fire chief down in Fairfield, we have a regional fire school that you all helped pay for, and I thank you for that almost $12 million the state invested. There's another school in New Haven that you all could conceivably use, but the closest is Middlesex. And because Middlesex has not been funded in the current bond structure, I was speaking actually with several other legislators about this, that you have an opportunity to go very nearby to a federal Army Reserve site that the city has invested in and that the local department has a lot of resources put into. And rather than even the $12 million that it took for Fairfield or the Valley School that's being considered at $18 million, the cost for the state is $5.6 million to give them a burn building, a training tower, and a Butler building for their apparatus. I say that because your firefighters are volunteers almost exclusively here. You are asking them, not you, but they're volunteering to put their lives on the line.
Absolutely.
And I know personally the mandates that come from national, international, and state programs that they maintain certifications. So they have to do these live burns. There's no place reasonable in each of your communities to do them, and so having that kind of regional funding available is incredibly important, understanding the diversity of 169 towns, 345 fire departments, and a state of steady habits. We have in this state 169 911 answering points. To put it in comparison, California has 4, Rhode Island has 1. But we didn't want to give up our primacy in each of the 169
Well,
communities.
actually, we are in a regional
I'm glad I
dispatch. But I think you point out a good point, which is that regionalization is an important concept. It takes investment. So if it takes investment in building a regional facility, the state can't simply say, well, regionalize, but not put any money into it.
Well, that debt diet left nothing on the table that wasn't going to pay back. And fire schools, by definition, don't make an income. They can break even, but they can't make an income. And as a result, those things that are critical to life safety and infrastructure may not get brought forward because they don't fill that very narrow business model. We need to see that the regions that are being expected a lot of also receive. It's sort of an obus oblige. Of those that are expected much, we need to give much too. And I'll throw this right to you now, because we've been dancing on Hartford's head a little. And
So I think with regionalization, there are a lot of misconceptions up in Hartford. They think that small towns aren't doing enough and that the state needs to essentially force them or try to initiate more regionalization. When in reality, with Laura, Kathy, and Noel, they are the most direct representative with taxpayers. They have to have budget meetings. They have to prepare a local budget that satisfies taxpayer needs. So if there is an opportunity for them to regionalize and save money without giving up the quality of service, they're going to do it. And I think Hartford doesn't understand that that's what they're actually trying to do and are already doing it. I think Hartford could learn a lot from small town mayors and first selectmen and town managers and so on, because they really are trying to be as efficient as possible. And I think if the state really saw that and allowed them to really engage with other towns and get out of the way, I think there would be much more reaching that regionalization goal that the state wants to see but is not providing the necessary tools to allow these folks to get there. So, I mean, they're all doing a wonderful job. And like I said, they are the most direct representatives to taxpayers. People don't come up to the state with our state budget. They do come to the public hearings, but they're not actually in the room when that budget is presented on the House floor. They are in the room, or can be in the room, when these folks are doing so.
I want to pick up a little bit on that. We've all talked about this. We want to be at the table when decisions are made in Hartford, when mandates come down to us, or unfunded mandates, because we believe that we know how our communities operate. Any of us as selectmen know that any given day, we're always on the firing line. We've got to answer to our constituents, and that's the number one issue that's coming down to us. We're concerned that as the state looks at its fiscal crisis, more and more of those tax burdens are going to come to us, and we cannot absorb some of the bills that are in the legislature right now that would put that tax burden on us. But Representative Carney, if we could shift this a little bit, because we're all concerned about this, and I know the governor is, and it doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat, we're all in this together. We want the state to work, and so that's important to us. But we know that in the last few years there's been a net migration of people out of Connecticut in a certain age cohort. That's affected our families, affordability of our housing, our school districts. What can we do to keep families in Connecticut, to put them in our school system, to get them into our towns and communities?
I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with job opportunities in the state of Connecticut. And also within that, though, is educating younger folks what jobs are actually available. You know, we do have a thriving manufacturing industry in the state of Connecticut. You have UTC, you have Electric Boat, you have the Lee Company right here in Westbrook, and they're having trouble filling these jobs, and they're good jobs. I mean, they're jobs where you got to get your hands dirty. They're good jobs, though. Good benefits. They're the type of jobs where if you work there for a few years, you can put a down payment on a home and not have to take out really much in student loans. But a lot of folks are not getting into those professions, and you know they're staying more in the city where the jobs suit what they went to school for, and not having children later. So there's a lot of factors as to why folks aren't coming back to the communities in which they were raised or moving there to begin with. You know, I was raised in Old Saybrook. My family moved to Westbrook in the 1950s, so I've stayed here because I really truly care about this community. But you have to provide those job opportunities, again, the education to get these kids, to get younger people into those jobs, and you know, then people, I think, will come here. The quality of life is great, and that's the one thing I worry about at the state level with some of these talks about forced regionalization and things like that, or rising property taxes, is then you could reduce that quality of life, which will put us into an even deeper hole.
I'd love to hear from the rural
Yeah.
communities that aren't along the post road and have different business opportunities, if you want to stay on that subject.
I
or
do
move
want to
over.
stay on that subject because I think Devin hit it right on the head. And what we're doing in Durham is trying to address that. So we all are members of the same Workforce Board region, Workforce Alliance, and I've been working with them very closely to raise awareness of the jobs that are available. And one of the things that we are doing at Coginchaug Regional High School is bringing manufacturing companies in to talk to the students. We call them snack and learns. And what they're talking about are the really cool products that are made in Connecticut, the job opportunities that are open right now, the living wages that they're offering, and the career path opportunities, and even college. So if you want to go to college, maybe delay it for a few years, and then they'll pay for it instead of incurring the college debt that, quite frankly, I believe is ruining our economy. It's really hindering our youth from natural progressions of life. Getting married, having children, buying homes. So we have to be mindful of that circular economy and what's happening in our communities. I believe that we all should be working more closely with our workforce boards. The governor just released some bond money that was approved for workforce development for our region, $3.5 million. For mostly a skill-up program. So what this program does is in 6 weeks or 9 weeks, it gives an employee the skills that they need to walk into a manufacturing door. And we've already had employers tell us that with this training, it's as if they've already been on the floor for 6 months. Wow. And then that gives an employer an opportunity to then put their own training in place quicker. Yeah. And we have employers that are just climbing on board with that. In fact, one employer said, your next class, I will hire every single one of them. So the more we allow our kids exposure to these type of career paths, and they are career paths. We have manufacturers in Connecticut that have work into the 2030s, the late 2030s. That is a career.
Yeah.
And I think we have to, I hate using the phrase shift the paradigm, but we have to shift the paradigm away from telling our kids that they have to go to college and then have them come home and live in their parents' basement until they're 26, and then they have to go get a job because insurance is no longer available.
And by the way, find a woman and get a house.
And all
Good luck
of that.
with that. Or men. Yeah,
and all
good
of
luck
that.
with all that.
So, you know, in all fairness to parents, and look, I was one of them, you know, you're going to college. But what I did do a little differently with my children is that I said, here's the money we've saved, and if you go to state schools, you will have no debt.
That's
You
fantastic.
go to private schools, unfortunately, you're going to have debt. And that allowed my son to start up a company, take that risk, because he didn't have that debt to worry about. But we have to shift the paradigm. We have to stop thinking as manufacturing as dirty and dangerous and something you're going to get laid off from in 2 years' time. These are good, solid career path jobs.
And corporate jobs are no longer that secure 30-year arc. So as my wife learned at the Nobel Prize winner, James Schiller, was speaking at a prep school luncheon that my son was going to school at. And he looked out at the crowd of expectant parents who were spending way too much money on pre-college preparation, that said to them, well, my sons are both in philosophy, which harkens back to the Adams phrase about I study war, that my sons can study philosophy and so on. But he said, practically, this is a Nobel Mathematics Prize winner. I wish they'd gone and become car mechanics, because there's work in car mechanics. I think as much as the looks of shock and awe resounded around the room, there was truth to that we have misled, I think, a generation to believe that they must go on to college and they must get a cerebral position that has no necessarily promise of employment.
And we also have to start looking at the return on investment. So if you're going to pursue a major, you have to understand the job that you're going to get with that major and what the salaries, the projected salaries could be. And then measure that against the debt you're going to incur.
So you don't even need a Nobel Prize to understand that. It's ROI. It's really return on investment. And Kath, would you weigh in on this as well?
Well, I think what the rural communities also have to recognize is that, you know, all those jobs are not ever going to be in our individual town, which underlines the fact that we are all interconnected. We're connected with the cities, and I don't think that the whole state will thrive or even survive if we don't make sure that our cities are vibrant and active places. So it's not an either or. You know, it's not a, you know, we want ours and you want theirs. We have to do this together. We have you know, people who will go to work in Durham, and they will have people who go to work in Killingworth, but we'll also have people who go to Middletown or New Haven or New London, or even Westbrook.
That's right. Again, the Lee Corporation. I mean, we do have a very diverse state, and as small as we are, it's remarkable. It's one of the things that I love about our state is that we have this incredible diversity. Even as I tell folks next door, just going to Mystic, you can see European settlers at Mystic Seaport, you can see Native Americans at the Pequot Museum, or you can see the true natives over at the aquarium. Either way, you're going to see a very diverse population base, and each of them living separately, and that's sort of a microcosm for Connecticut.
So we also need the good transportation to get us back and forth among our cities.
Let's go to Devin on this. You're in the Transportation Committee, and tell us why, and the former governor was, that one of the things that was very important to him is to build a transportation system. We can look down the road here a mile. We have a brand new train station. It costs $16 million, totally funded by the state. People use it every day. But Devin, tell us why a transportation system is so important to our economy and the things we're talking about today.
I mean, it connects folks that in a lot of times, you know, a small town like Westbrook, it can connect them to that larger city, such as New Haven, or onto a place like Bridgeport, Stamford, or even New York. And a lot of folks don't want to get in their car and drive to work, especially if they have to go somewhere like New Haven or Bridgeport when the traffic is so bad, especially during rush hour. So it's so important that those options are available to young professionals or older professionals, that they can take that public transportation and not have to worry about getting in their car and sitting in traffic for an hour plus. So I think it is important that the state does invest more in public transportation. You know, they did start the Hartford line, which I understand has been pretty successful, taking folks from New Haven to Hartford and on to Springfield. I think the more we can connect our small towns to the larger cities where those jobs tend to be, is going to benefit the small towns, so that people will want to purchase a home here, because they know that they can easily get to and from work every day without having to sit in hours and hours of traffic.
Devin, and this is a major issue of discussion throughout the state, going back to something Kathy said earlier about regionalization, and I know it's controversial. We're talking about regionalizing school districts, but I'm asking you because last night there was a forum, I think in Old Saybrook. I gather there were 50 or 60 people there, but as you listen to people from our areas, what were they saying about regionalizing school districts?
Well, I mean, the big thing is we don't want the state telling us how we have to regionalize. And I think that's important because everyone within their town or region, they know what people are thinking, especially the three of you. You kind of have your finger on the pulse of your community. You know who many people are, what their background is, what they love about the town, what they love about the education. And I think when you get up to that state level, again, they're looking at things from a completely different perspective. So I think that the sentiment in the room was the state should not be the one telling us how to regionalize. If local taxpayers or local elected officials propose a plan, that's one thing, but not the state. Because a lot of folks, one of the big reasons they come to small towns in the state of Connecticut is because of the quality of education. You can't get the quality of education in a lot of these small towns, even at some of the private schools in the state. And you can't get the type of public education you can find here in many other states, maybe Massachusetts, New Hampshire, states like that. So when you start talking about changing the way our small towns deliver education, it starts to really scare people, because that's what they have. That's why they came to this town. That's why they purchased a home here. And the quality of education doesn't just affect education. It affects property values. It affects the quality of life. It affects a student's or a parent's daily routine. If you were to regionalize into a big school, you would have to think about transportation. You would have to think about athletics. You'd have to think about opportunities in athletics, opportunities in the arts that may not be there with such a larger school district.
Just opening it up, because actually I want to kind of flip it now. This is fascinating. I should just let you all talk, and you folks are having a great opportunity to hear how the sausage is made, and it's not as scary as it seemed. It's just regular folks like you willing to step into the fray, into the arena, and make things happen that otherwise won't. That's what government is getting people, more than one in a community, to figure out how we're going to dig those wells, how we're going to get those stones out of the earth and into fences. And Connecticut is unique in its character for the age in which all of your communities have such age.
Because we don't have county government either. That's very important, picking up on your point.
Huge element. So we talk about regionalism, and yet I happen to sit on Speaker Sharkey's Moore Commission on regionalism. We looked at over 200 separate maps of the state of Connecticut, and even when they were delineated into, say, 5, your 5 congressional districts differ from your 5 emergency management districts.
Everything is different.
There is no continuity of government, and even though, again, we used to have to check the county radio for the fire department, it was not used. It was something that we have a steady habit of checking, but we don't actually have more than what you just described very aptly. These people on the grounds, walking in front of the grocery store every day and being confronted with questions. They're not away in Hartford, they're not down in Washington. So tell me what you're hearing this year. It's a new administration, it's a new climate in Hartford, I see it. What do you hear up there that these folks are going to be worried about, probably already are worried about?
I certainly think the biggest thing is the potential for additional property taxes, which would include mandates or passing costs onto smaller or onto municipalities from the state. I would guess that most town leaders, that's what concerns them the most, because when you add that cost burden onto a municipality that was previously, let's take the teacher pension costs, for example, so that the municipalities don't fund the teacher pensions, the state pays a portion of it. So the state is considering passing some of those costs onto municipalities because we're in so much debt with this unfunded pension liability for teachers. So they want to pass some of the what's called normal costs, which are current teachers, what they're paying into for their retirement. So what that would do, though, is say, for example, I think in Old Saybrook that cost burden would be probably between $300,000 and $400,000. But when you add that to a budget, you're going to, and it would go to the Board of Education budget. You're either going to have to add that or try to and not cut anything, so you're adding that $400,000, or you're going to have to try to find something to cut. And like I said, superintendents, town leaders, they face the public on budgets and taxes more than most other elected officials do. So they have to explain why they're raising property taxes, or because there's really no other option, or why they're cutting, this position or that position from the school, which may be something very important to a particular set of parents. So I think that those sort of policy discussions going on in Hartford would be what I would guess is of most concern to
Could I just jump in? I think we really have to get to, at a very basic level, to stop talking about the state wants to do this, or the state's money versus the town's money, because really it's all the same people's money. And so the town governments feel that the state will make cuts that we then have to pick up, as if that was somehow saving some taxes when it's not. But just at a very basic level, we need to see ourselves as all part of one thing, not as adversaries or even competitors. We're all doing the same thing. We're saving the same people. The people who are paying the property taxes in our towns are paying the income taxes in the state.
And the federal. We're just on the verge of
Right.
April 15th.
Right.
I'm allowing you to know when we take her. And we're all feeling that cut. And as you say very aptly, and we all nodded, it's all our money. It's just the same pool of money, and how it gets, anteed up here or there. We actually should have superintendents at the table, because that's 2/3 of your budget. So when people talk about your budget, the First Select folk are being sort of hampered by the fact that 2/3 of the budget are fixed by all sorts of mandates and laws and statutes that don't allow them to even have this part of the conversation. And the board members and the board, school superintendents are the ones who are dictating 2/3 of your budget.
Well, let's face it, if we didn't have the pension debt that we have, this conversation would be very, very different. And so when we do talk us and them, it's the state that made the decision to underfund, or for many years not fund at all, those obligations that they made. If we were current, we would be in a much different state than we are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, this really speaks in my mind to how we are not a political conversation in the traditional Democrat-Republican terms, because there have been governors of both parties
sides
and an
who
independent mixed in there, all
responsible.
trying to resolve the same issue. Nobody gets into government. None of you, and none of your colleagues up in Hartford are doing it for self-aggrandizement. This doesn't make you sleep better at night, probably. You're doing it because you want to leave it better than you found it. And I firmly believe each governor has taken that approach too, but we haven't seen the results that we would hope for. So here we are today, 2019. What do you see as resolving this? As and this isn't, maybe it isn't resolvable. To me, I'm flummoxed. I don't know what the resolution is, but anybody at the table throw in.
I mean, I look at our unfunded liability as being the number one issue in the state of Connecticut. And I'm not sure that everyone up in Hartford agrees with that. There's so many pieces of legislation that were proposed this session, and many well-meaning pieces of legislation that we may need. But I think that we really must focus at this time on our unfunded debt, because we are never going to move forward as a state. We're never going to really be that desirable place we want to be until we can tackle that debt. It's always going to be there. It's just like, using example, student loan debt. That's why people are burdened by that debt. They can't move forward. They can't buy that house. They can't move in this new direction. And that happens at the state because of that debt. And we have to do everything we can. And I don't have all the answers, but I agree with Kathy that we do need to work together. Big cities, small towns, rural areas, to try to tackle this one problem. Not kick the can down the road, but see how we can fund it. Is there new streams? We're talking about some new taxable things in the state of Connecticut, like sports betting, for example. Can you take that money and put a large chunk of it towards the teacher's retirement? It's what we should be doing. So those are the things I think we really need to focus on, is how do we get out of this debt that's just perpetuating every single year and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That, to me, is the number one problem and should be the number one focus of every legislator up in Hartford.
Yet there's always, every year, pieces of legislation that take all the airtime and takes all the air in the room. Recreational marijuana is one of them. There's usually one or two of those types of topics out there that I think is a distraction and a diversion away from this effort.
I'll just throw in one other thing, which is we spent a lot of time talking about legislation and trying to figure out the right balance and the right fixes. I think that we should be looking also, and the legislature should be involved in this, in looking at how our state agencies function and where we can find some efficiencies and some better services there. And I think there's a lot of room for looking at how we do things. Simple example is the state troopers And so this is one of the ways we are already regionalized. Killingworth, I think all of our towns have resident state troopers. That's a regional system. But the troopers, first of all, I think there's an agreement now on any state road, they have to do the traffic control. So we've got a couple of power poles being replaced in Killingworth, and there's 2 trooper cars there. That seems to me incredible waste of a stretched resource already. I know that my trooper says that now he spends a whole lot of time dealing with cyber crime. That's not what they're trained for, really. That's not the most effective way to deal with cybercrime. We need to look at within each of these agencies and really say, you know, we could be doing this better and make life better, even without spending more money for our local.
I can comment specifically about the point that Kathy, we are very fortunate in this town to have Troop F, which is less than 2 miles away. They've done an incredible service for us. They supervise our constables, who happen to all be very part-time. But this is the point. The Lieutenant Constable, his name, came to us about 2 months ago, and he said, you know, we know a cost for in this town. That's talking about shifting things to the town. Not just the salary, but all the benefits. Everything from the troopers now been shifted in a municipality. So for one trooper in our town, not just salary, which is about $100,000 a year, but all the benefits, another $100,000. So we look at that with 2 troopers. That's $400,000. Could we do it better? The lieutenant came to us and said, you know, one thing you might consider is, if you had one less trooper, you need to hire a full-time constable. That was going back to what Kathy was saying. Some of the work that they do can be done by a full-time constable. And I know that's sort of that's controversial, but we can still get the policing done in our municipalities at less cost and not affecting what the state is doing. So I think there's an awareness that that's important. We're going through a major study right now on extending our radio system throughout the town. 3 individuals from the Department of Emergency Management came down last Thursday and talked to us at the direction of the commissioner, simply saying, these are ways that we can work with you to get that radio project in place, to have your towns talk to one another, to work with their troops. So these are all examples of where services can be shared, and they can be done in a way that will save us all money, both the state and the town.
And I think it's important that the people who are watching know 2 things. One, we now have a commissioner of emergency management and public protection that is a Hartford police chief.
Yes.
And he has a far better understanding, for whatever it's worth in my experience, of what municipal and smaller towns need and how they operate than did a commissioner of corrections out of New York State. So I'm really happy at seeing how this appointment went. I'm excited about that. Having said that, no one watching, I think, is going to understand that you are given that bill for these 2 state troopers, and yet you can't negotiate that contract.
No, we cannot.
correct.
Well, on top of that, there's the pension issue there too. The amount on top of the salary is greater than the salary to cover benefits, and a lot of that is because we're picking up the unfunded pension from many years of the past.
So I'd like to just talk a little bit more about what Noel brought up about the communications. So Devin, you should know that this is one way that the state, without any money being expended on the state's part, able to give us financial relief. Our communication network, our towers, et cetera, is about 20 years old. We were looking at some serious infrastructure upgrades. But because we are about to sign an MOU with the state of Connecticut to use their trunk system that's already built out, already paid for, we won't have to do that infrastructure upgrade. We are upgrading our radios, which, by the way, are also past their lifespan, so we were going to upgrade them anyway, and we instantly got relief. So if the state could find some of those ways to partner with us, really without any skin off the nose of the state, I think we would very much appreciate it and appreciate that partnership. And I agree with you with Commissioner Ravello. I've already met with him in his office on a few of my concerns, which include the way we are charged for resident state troopers. I can tell you that it's dramatically increased the way the Durham Fair operates. You know how important the Durham Fair is to our state's tourism. It's one of the premier events in Connecticut, the last full week in September each year. And the cost of public safety for that event has almost tripled in the last 5-6 years. And it's going to really be a burden on us moving forward in the way the Durham Fair can grow, and not even grow, but survive.
Well, you raise a really interesting point. I've already interviewed a couple of you and look forward to having a conversation with you. But this is a state where tourism is a key component, and yet, going back 4 administrations, tourism was bundled into a group of 4 from its own unique department and then downsized and more or less outsourced. So, for example, Mystic has a wonderful tourism finance because all of the businesses have gotten together and made sure that they are a vibrant element. However, here on the shoreline, where again we're on the property of Water's Edge, we're working out of studios of Valley Shore Community Television, thanks to the good graces of both legislators but also the businesses. It's a collaboration between chambers of commerce and elected officials. You don't have the infrastructure available to you to make sure in this 9-town community, which includes the Goodspeed Opera House across the river, but all of the support to Goodspeed, includes, which is to say Chester and part of our 9-town area, includes the Water's Edge and Old Saybrook and the whole shoreline, and wonderful places to visit, historical and ecological in Killingworth, in Durham, and the fair, which is, I believe, to do a last plug here, the largest in the nation of its type of volunteer organization.
Volunteer, yeah.
Fantastic. We talk about the state troopers and constables, but there are also the CERT teams, the community emergency response teams of volunteers, often retirees, who can also pick up some of the duties that that are being done. And so the idea that there are these 1,000 points of light that the late President George H.W. Bush cited, we know them. We talked about them in the times that we've talked about our shows, how important your volunteers are, how important your community members are to what tourists want to come and see. They run your
and that's
businesses.
Another thing that has to be recognized when we talk about regionalization, because we can't lose all those volunteers, and a lot of those volunteers are there because it's a real community activity. So volunteer fire companies, we have a fantastic volunteer fire company, and while on paper it might look as if, well, why do we have all these separate fire companies? If we had to professionalize our fire company, that would be far more expensive, and we would lose that community aspect of it. But I don't think that people will volunteer for a regional fire company in the same way. So,
Getting back to tourism, it's really quite embarrassing that a small state like Rhode Island has a budget triple ours. Every one of our connecting states to us, our neighbors, have huge budgets that we cannot compete with to bring any tourist dollars here.
and driving here and going by the closed sign over the,
Yeah.
I think that
What's the message?
Governor
Leave us
Lamont,
alone, go away. That's what it says.
Keep driving.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Nothing to see here.
I think Governor Lamont said that was one of his priorities, is to get rid of those signs. Let's do that.
Well, and not just get rid of the signs, but let's revitalize our commitment to tourism, which
Absolutely.
is a huge. One of the things I loved about Jody Rell's staycation approach, and I still have those maps of Connecticut, is they gave you 52 ways to experience Connecticut, and all of them different. We're a wonderful state. We lose sight of that as we bemoan our financial picture right now, but. Honestly, this is out of all of our wheelhouses. Probably we need a governor's representative here to talk about where the executive branch is committing to things like tourism. So that's another show. But as we get near the end of our hour, I just want to have, everybody will have a chance to sort of speak at the close, but I want to get one more look at how you, in transportation and in the other committees that you serve on and interact with, see Hartford and each of these communities, the 9 in our region, cooperating, collaborating, working together to get those questions about state trooper expenses that are addressed and negotiated at a state level, working well and being better cogs in this machine that is the state of Connecticut.
I mean, I just think the communication is the key. Listening from folks like Laura, Noel, and Kathy, they're the boots on the ground. They're the ones who are, listening to their community members each and every day and telling the state, this is how you can be more efficient. This is how we can be more efficient. This is what we need to do. And I think if you do that collaborative approach, and you can do it not just with small towns, you can do it with a big city like Hartford or a big city like New Haven. What do you need to change? It could be small, could be large, that can allow us to succeed. Sometimes it may not be possible what some of these towns or cities want, but at least having that conversation, that communication, and really trying to take action. We are the land of steady habits, and a lot of times things move way too slowly up in state government. So we got to really jumpstart that and really start to make some changes that can make our state more successful and more efficient. But listening to these folks is how you're going to do it.
I want to pick up on that. Communication is a two-way street. Representative Carney, when you call him, within an hour he calls you back. It's not just what's going up, it's what's coming down. So I agree with him 100%. If you ask me what it's all about having discussions like this. We are very fortunate. We belong to something called the Council of Governments. We get together once a month. It doesn't matter what our party affiliation is. We know what the concerns are of our community. We have to live and breathe them every day. I happen to like my job a lot because I believe in the state. I believe in our communities. I think people don't want to see in Connecticut what they see at the nationalism, too much tribalism, too much division, where people are not working together. We have to work together. And we mentioned this to the governor who was here last week. He said, I got a difficult job to do. I'm 65 years old, he says. I'm not going anyplace. I'm going to put a lot of ideas out there. There's going to be a lot of rejection going on, but it's going to take us at least a decade for us to get things on track. And we're all a part of that. It doesn't matter our political affiliation. So what gives me a lot of hope is the people of the state, our history, and our ability to know that we've got a good future if we work together.
I will say I love the acronym COG. It isn't intentional necessarily, but you all and everybody here at this table and the folks that couldn't be here, I should mention that while Devin was kind enough to take time, all those committees are currently in their last week of having to put out their documentation. Every person representing Christine Palm, Vince Candeloro, Len Fasano, Christine Cohen, I know I'm going to leave somebody out, but Noreen Kokaruda, of course, who was set to come and then was ill this morning. All of them have made a commitment to be here, but more importantly, to be there. If you reach out to any one of them, whether you see them in the street, whether you call them on the phone, whether you send them an email or a piece of snail mail, or whether you walk into their offices, I promise you, my experience has been every one of them eager, not just willing, but eager to have that kind of dialogue, because we want to know, me as a host of this and you as the surrogate taxpayer, want to know how we can make it better. Nobody gets into this to make it worse. We want to see it left better than it was found. And I know all of you have come back to the table and the election booth again and again, but it's critical that the people out there understand watching this is an act of democratic engagement. And being a part of this great democratic republic that we are in requires work and means that you don't just go in and vote. If you even do that, you contact your elected officials. You can put a letter out in the paper, and that's fine, but that's not really a direct conversation. You want to make something better, don't just fix blame. Don't just put out that broadsheet and have a public statement. Get engaged privately. These people, to a person, to a man and woman, are committed to you. They may not agree. We may not all agree, but they will be there to get a conversation going and find out. I've learned things right here that I didn't know, not surprisingly. There's a lot I don't know.
I think the public would be surprised to hear just how little feedback we do get compared to the possibility that's out there, compared to the the number of constituents we have. In relation, the feedback isn't that great.
I see each of your pages inviting people to call, to come, to write. And we were talking at the beginning before we started about a great event going on for, I think, domestic violence, to stem domestic violence. And your concern was it was a beautiful sunny day, were people going to go? part of our purpose here is that this is taped, so at least people who want to learn how you all are as individuals, as Kathy and Noel and Laura and Devin, engage as people, as government officials, not as some monolith, as some bureaucrat. None of you are bureaucrats.
Well, the three of us are really fortunate to be from small enough places that people can walk into our offices and
they do.
And participate.
And they do.
Absolutely.
But compared to how many we have, it's just not enough. It's not enough.
And they do in Tony Harp's office in New Haven, and they do
Absolutely.
in Joe Gannam's office in Bridgeport. It's not that it doesn't happen, it's just that it doesn't happen enough.
Right.
And you people have put in an hour of your time today to make sure that we're having a conversation and that we're having a dialogue among state and local officials and eventually federal as well. It's critical that you people get engaged in the conversation. Use your rights as citizens to communicate, because it's not, democracy isn't free, as they say, and freedom isn't free. Somebody's out defending it on the streets, on the highways, overseas, and you guys and girls are defending it. Forgive me, I'm not gender specific.
It's okay.
When I say you guys, I always get corrected by the firefighter in my department that would say, it's not firemen, it's firefighters, and she's right. It is critical that every citizen understand their civic responsibility. And it's hard because we don't have local journalists, we don't have local newspapers that do much more than just send out what we send in as press releases. And so you hearing what's going on in Hartford is already distilled and delimited by that, by the function of economics that says we don't need newspapers, we have Facebook, we have social media. And so whatever any individual puts out there becomes the news. And as you said, sometimes distracts. Weapons of mass distraction. Let's put up the state cookie as the thing we're going to complain about taxpayers' dollars being used toward, instead of transportation, which is critical to you all.
Maybe we can end. Kathy, last summer, was it 350 years that Killingworth celebrated their... Just make a comment about what was unique about that and what made you feel good about that and why that's important to not just Killingworth but to all of us. 350 years.
Well, it's amazing how some things have changed and some things haven't changed. So you can see some of the same disputes going on back in the day. One of Killingworth's few claims to wider fame is this poem, I think I mentioned it to you before, by Longfellow about the birds of Killingworth. And it's amazing because it's from the 1800s and it's all about how you can disrupt an ecosystem and that will not have good consequences. And we're still having those same debates. What are the proper ways to protect our environment? What are the proper ways to do economic development while protecting our environment? We've been doing it for 350 years.
Well,
we still have a board of selectmen.
As we come close to wrapping up, will you have anything to say to the folks directly? You want to offer your thoughts to your constituents and our greater Connecticut viewers?
I think we should all work to see ourselves as citizens of our town and citizens of our state and citizens of our country, and not see our interests as separate from or even divorceable from the interests of the whole state and the whole country. We've got to make it work for everybody.
Amen. How about yourself?
Second that 100%. Well said, Kathy.
And Laura?
Well, and I would also like to add that we have to start talking in more positive terms. This is a wonderful state. We have some challenges, but we have to start talking better about ourselves. This is one of the things that I agreed with Governor Malloy about. If we can't talk positively about ourselves, who else will? So we have to start changing the language that we use about the state of Connecticut.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said, and Chris, thank you so much for having me here today. One thing I just want to highlight is the legislative session ends on June 5th at midnight, so it is important, as you said, for folks to get engaged, to contact me or another legislator, whoever their representative or state senator is, because it's critical. It's less than 2 months now. A lot is going to happen. So if you have an opinion on something, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, If you don't let your state senator or state representative know, they're not going to know. We're not mind readers. So it's important that people get engaged in the process and let us know how they think.
Well, I want to thank all of you, not just for this past hour, which has been very enlightening, I think, but for your public service. My grandfather, I was describing, used to bemoan that public servants are vilified instead of upheld, and I'm here to praise you, not to bury you. I'm here to thank you and tell you that we all appreciate what you do, and the idea that you are willing to put your time, your days and weeks and months for the pittance that you're paid speaks volumes to what we are as Connecticut. So with that, I end this special edition, hopefully the first of many, because there are 2 more months in the session almost, and we will be having this conversation in our offices, in our COG meetings, in our workshops, and across the state for the coming weeks, months, and 10 years and longer. So thank you all. Thank you for visiting with us. And we wish you all a wonderful holiday season coming up, a wonderful legislative session coming up, and a great spring to come.